situation, it is now time to give the floor to Michel Prieur on the One Health approach, because now there has been a momentum created by the Normandy Chair for Peace, an international momentum, and now Michel has proposed a beautiful project. Daniel Galvado, whom you heard this morning, really contributed to this. It is a work of research. This is a really scientific activism and work of scientific diplomacy. So an international convention on pandemics. Michel Prieur, you have the floor. So with regards to our work on the Treaty on Pandemics, the Pandemics Treaty, so first we might ask ourselves the question, what is the relationship between in the initial program? This was the major accident that occurred, as everybody knows, and which got us to think a lot about this. So if we think a lot about it, I mean, with hindsight, there is a link between the pandemic work and the chair. This connection is justified because the pandemic was a real war. We must not forget that there were more than 6 million of people who died in the entire world. And therefore, we could legitimately ask ourselves the question of the peace, you know, because if we talk about war, and then we talk about peace, and maybe this was a unique opportunity as well. I'm not going to say a dreamed opportunity, but a unique opportunity to set up a legal instrument that could enable us to contribute to peace with the earth, because of course there is an obvious link between the pandemic and the environment, and we can of course justify this work within the context of the objectives of the Normandy Chair for Peace. And then there is another justification, scientific justification, which is the interdependency, the interconnectedness, which is at the heart of all the topics that we explored and we will continue to explore tomorrow. Because with the work on the pandemic, we, in a very concrete way, we have the interconnectedness between peace, safety, human rights, and environment. And I like to remind, to recall the fact that the interdependency of man with nature, because of course the pandemic also illustrates the interdependency between man and nature. This was formulated legally before Stockholm with a preamble of the Ramsar Convention, which is the first international text that expresses very clearly the fact that there needs to be a harmony between mankind and nature, and that there is an interdependency between mankind and nature. And then this was a notion taken up again in the Stockholm Convention, and then it became a very commonplace concept. So this is the starting point of our work with regards to our research. So the project of convention. So we will see how this convention, then why this convention, then how, and then we will present the text briefly, and then we will see the future development. So why? Well, because very quickly we saw that one of the effects, amongst others, of the pandemic in relation with regards to the principles and the strategies was to really promote the idea of One Health, which emerged in the discourses that were pronounced during the fight against the pandemic. And of course, these notion existed before. There were already researchers in the United States that looked at this idea. And since 2010, three international institutions were gathering regularly to discuss the concept of One Health, so the convergence of their sectoral policy. So these three organizations are the WHO, the FAO, so WHO, Human Health, FAO, Farming and Agriculture, and the International Organization for Animal Health, which always has this legal characteristic of not being a UN organization because it was created before the existence of the United Nations. So this explains why, unfortunately, when in 2010 there was a topic that was common to three UN organizations, we didn't invite the environmental component. We didn't invite the UNEP, the UN Environment Programme, which doesn't have an autonomous legal status like WHO or the FAO. And it is only thanks to the pandemic that the WHO has decided to invite the UNEP to the discussions. This shows the level of international institutions. So this is how the topic of One Health is facing some walls, which are bureaucratic silos and administrative and legal silos. So of course, we need to face these obstacles when we are looking at environmental law. So faced with this assessment, which is rather lamentable, with management in silos by the different bodies that are competent to deal with the pandemic, then the Normandy Chair for Peace, the Center for Comparative Environmental Law, and a network that was really a pandemic network that was created in Italy, that we decided to gather our scientific knowledge in order to overcome these legal and institutional obstacles which would really halt and impede these efforts at universalization. And we know that this treaty is far from being signed yet. So we gathered, from between September and November 2021, at a very fast pace, we had a regular Zoom meeting for the 3 months with 26 participants that are specialized in health law, in human rights law, or environmental law. And they created subgroups, and each subgroup was drafting each part of this project of convention. Therefore, our response was to say that facing this threat, it was to draft a text that reflected a universal solidarity through this international convention. So why did we take this initiative? It is because a few months before, following a request that did not come from the WHO, because the first person who talked about a pandemic treaty was not the WHO, it was the EU. in a meeting in Rome. And then the WHO went back to it. They said, okay, there will be some legal opinions about this pandemic treaty. The WHO reacted. So after the EU, in May 2021, during the World Assembly, they said, okay, yes, we could do an international convention on pandemics. This was May 2021. But they were so hesitant that they said, okay, we're not going to decide straight away. We're going to gather a small working group to look at a feasibility of a pandemic convention. And we were in the middle of the pandemic, and apparently there was an emergency, a health emergency, but with regards to law, there was no such emergency. So they said, okay, we will host a working group. So the working group gathered, and in December they said, yes, we need to draft a convention on pandemics, and then we would need to wait for another official meeting of the WHO that said, okay, we will create another intergovernmental group, and they started to discuss only in March 2022. In March 2022 was the first negotiation meeting, March 2022, and the end of 2021. I was so upset, so annoyed by the slow pace of the WHO, the blockage from the WHO, that I had written several papers unsuccessfully to be published in Le Monde or Libération, French newspapers, but they were released in Canada and in the foreign press, but they were not released in France. And I was alerting on the health emergency, and I was saying that postponing a pandemic treaty was a real scandal, and that I was giving a good example, on the other hand, of a dramatic event of a different extent, which was the explosion, the nuclear accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. So you see, we had our first big nuclear accident. What happened after Chernobyl? Well, the states immediately gathered following this emergency, because there was a disaster, there could be a universal threat given the number of nuclear power plants disseminated all around the world. And the states ratified and signed the Geneva Convention on Nuclear Disasters that came into force in 1986. So with regards to the nuclear threats, in 1986, the states decided in 6 months to adopt an international convention, and in 2022, now we're in 2023, there is still no international convention.
Entre le nucléaire et la pandémie, qui est assez illustratif sur la façon de travailler dans l'OMS. Alors évidemment, l'OMS, c'est une vieille institution qui a été créée après la guerre.
No practice of the international negotiation of treaties, contrary to other international organizations such as the FAO, because the WHO in 70 years, how many treaties on human health? Only one, a treaty on tobacco. That's all. Only one treaty in 70 years, which means that human health was not the subject of international negotiations and treaties led by the WHO. However, other international organizations have actually organized a lot of treaties, if we look at the FAO, for instance, or other UN organizations. Now, after having drafted our project, we tried to make it operational, and the Normandy Chair for Peace, there was an emergency. We published 3 versions of our project in English, Spanish, French, This book is not very long. It's a practical book, and there is a text of the project of the Pandemic Convention in it. This was then presented, and the arguments were presented in favor of this project with a summary, with an analytical summary and some explanations. So we have all the why and how, and it explains the content of the convention. And there is the text of the convention reproduced and translated in 3 languages. So thanks to the chair, we disseminated this project of treaty to the WHO, to the delegations of the states that participate in the negotiations. And we're very pleased to announce here, in a very polite manner, with all the diplomats of the WHO and all our heads of mission in Geneva, because this document sent by the post to Geneva was never acknowledged, neither from the WHO nor from the diplomatic representatives. So it's a real scandal in the relationships between the scientific community and environmental diplomacy, which shows there is still a great divide to make the work done by scientists much more concrete, to break that wall between the scientific community and the diplomatic community. There is still this gap to fill, and this is a blatant example of that. And I mean, nonetheless, the states have received it, but the negotiators did not throw it in the bin. They did not discard it, but we will see at the end of the day the difference between the final text of our project, and there is already a 0 draft of the WHO project. And I asked an intern to do a comparison table between the 0 draft and our project to look at the differences, because we didn't reinvent everything, and they didn't invent everything. The treaties is always made up in a specific way. There are a certain number of rules that need to be respected. So the negotiations, I said, started in 2022, and the CIDCE, which is an international NGO, which has the ECOSOC status and therefore has is entitled to have a seat in the international organizations, except the WHO, because that's another scandal. The participation within the WHO, in WHO, you do not have a right to participate. So there is no right of public participation. The NGOs that participate to the WHO are only the NGOs that are authorized by the NGOs, the only medical or paramedical NGOs. And I asked to be able to have a seat in that assembly, but I am not a medical NGO, therefore I could not take a seat. So we were not able to take part in the negotiations physically. The WHO pretended that they gave the floor to the public in April 2022, while I was in mission in Brazil at the time, and I had only 3 minutes in a WHO webinar, which gave the floor to the people who were not medical experts. So I had a floor 3 minutes, for 3 minutes, to present our project.
C'est tout. Mais pour participer à la négociation, 0. Alors la négociation se continue. Je n'ai pas suivi les dernières étapes parce que j'ai été un peu découragé quand même par le barrage.
Our contribution is of a legal nature. We are a scientific legal organization, and the UN accepts legal scientific organizations. We are not considered as eco-terrorists. Therefore, we have the full legitimacy to participate. Therefore, we will see at the end of the negotiations. Normally, the negotiation should end in 2024 or 2025. So this is the pace of the WHO. The WHO assemblies take place once a year, not twice a year. So this will need to be adopted at the end of the next WHO assembly. I don't know if the final text will be adopted in 2024 or 2025. Because at the same time, there is a great diplomatic conflict, which is important between the United States and other negotiators. And of course, the WHO is playing on this. There is a legal and strategic problem because within the WHO, there is an instrument called the international instrument regulation. It is a different status, which is to support the decisions taken by the WHO, and there is a legal and political point here because there are not two conventions by the WHO. So the RSI, the International Health Regulation, has become the subject of negotiations to be amended, and at the same time as the pandemic convention, the WHO is redrafting this legislation with other experts that are not at the same diplomatic level as the one that are in the conference. So there is some type of work. I don't know if it is a strategic work or a boycott work, and this halts the work on the convention because there are a lot of states that say that, okay, at the moment we are implementing prevention measures to face the pandemic, because the Chinese did not alert on time, even though they had an obligation to raise the alert on time. So we will improve the international health regulation in order to have an early warning system and to sound the alarm much quicker. And therefore, there is an overlapping between this international health regulation and the convention project, and this is halting and impeding the progression of the work. And to end, what I wanted to say is that, well, very quickly, you will look at the book. The book is in free access on the website of the chair, on the website of the CIDCE, cidce.org, and maybe elsewhere. The text is very simple. We had to develop it. We needed to look for the legal foundation to have this universal treaty. And we have the International Pact on cultural and universal rights. There is a right to health, of course. So we can found this text on pandemics on the right to health, which is a pre-existing right. There is a part on the general predispositions. There is a part on the preparation of pandemics. So before the pandemics, there is a part on the response to pandemics, one part on the cooperation and the support measures, the support with medical measures, vaccines, etc., with all the sales problems related to vaccines that remain a problem with the universal recognition of the right to vaccines. And of course, big economic challenges and pharmaceutical challenges, and then a part related to procedures and to final dispositions. So I would like to come back to an article which is really important for me, which is at the heart of the process of the application of the convention, which is the Article 26 of the convention. You know that all of the conventions in relation to the environment, the ones that work are the ones that have a good follow-up mechanism. And what does it mean? This is the role of the secretariat. And there is a committee for controlling the application, the enforcement of the convention. If you don't have this secretariat, you cannot have it, you cannot really make sure that everything is respected. And we see what works and what does not work in terms of conventions. So we needed the pandemic convention. We have this to have an effective secretariat and this type of committee. So an effective secretariat, an operational secretariat, and the problem was the war. So between the different institutions, because of course the WHO looks at human health, not animal health, environmental health, it's the UNEP, and animal health is the FAO, it's not the WHO. So therefore, if the secretariat is only located at the WHO, of course the convention will not be enforced, it will not be able to manage all of the topic in relation to human health, and knowing that we need to have specialists. 70% of human diseases have an animal origin in it. And it's a lot. And when you say that to WHO representatives, they don't know what you mean. So we must not have a secretariat which is solely in the hands of the WHO. And you know that in the international law, we are credible only if we use precedents and if we don't invent anything. Because international law is so rich, we can always find precedents. And so we said, okay, this is not new. And therefore, we propose to have a tripartite, a three-party secretariat made up of civil servants from the WHO, from the FAO, and from another organization. And then, of course, they can they can handle it between them, but they all need to be present. And this is the article 26. We are not negotiating Article 26 now, because they are now just at the beginning of the convention. But I'm curious to see what will happen with the negotiations about the secretariat, because this is where the future of the application of the pandemic will be decided. And to close on this, the future, it is very interesting to note that at the same time, when we want to discuss and to decide to have a pandemic convention under the direction of the WHO, the EU adopted the 8th Program of Action for the Environment. This is a decision of the 6th of April 2022. So what is there in that decision of 6th of April 2022, the Program of Action for the Environment from 2022 to 2030 of the EU? So this is no longer a soft law since Maastricht. This is a program which was integrated in the treaty. Therefore, there is a legal value that is enforceable to the states. And it is no longer just soft law. Therefore, the 8th program, in its preamble, paragraph 27, is called One Health, entitled One Health, and Article 3 of the action program incorporates at all levels of the policies of the EU, the One Health principle. So the One Health topic is integrated, incorporated in all of the aspects. So in everything, in the different policies, for example, the fishing policy, etc. And this is the objective of One Health. It's the cross-cutting, cross-discipline aspect. So this cross-discipline aspect has been organized within the One Health approach of the EU. So this is a considerable progress for the next few years. Whether we have a pandemic treaty or not, the EU will use this One Health approach and concept with the AIDS Programme of Action and Article 3, and then a French initiative of the SFDE and the CIDC, the One Health bill. Between the research center in Limoges and Strasbourg, with students that worked for 1 year in order to draft a bill, draft a law to see what could be a cross-cutting law in the French law. And it was sent to the government, and we're waiting for the government to take it into consideration. Thank you very much. And therefore, the book, you have it here. Therefore, we are now at the end of the first year dedicated to the highlights, the highlights and of the Normandy Chair for Peace. We were very honored to organize this first closing time, this first closing highlights, this first day of our symposium here at the Normandy region, 4 years after Tony Oposa conducted his first gathering at the moot court. It was very symbolic to gather all of us together, even if Tony Oposa addressed us a very warm welcome this morning, and One Health to conclude this day on One Health. This shows the cross-cutting approach of the chair, of course, the human and non-human aspects, and making peace with the earth and everything that lives in this earth. This was a great moment of conclusion, and of course, webinars were very, very intensive. These were work meetings. We were 26 every Monday. It was from 5 to 7 p.m. Then it was from 5 to 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. each, and we were all resistant. We resisted because, of course, Michel PRIEUR has the ability to drive us, to lead us, and we all worked collectively in order to draft this project of international treaty. This is the energy of Michel PRIEUR. Daniel Galvao, whom you saw this morning, sent more than 100 copies to the WHO, to the delegates. We had to go into the office of the Normandy Chair for Peace, and we would like to warmly thank her as well. So the first day, you saw only 5 lines of research out of 12. So tomorrow, we will start with Alexandra Aragao, who proposed a line of research on research and responsible innovation. And we realized that the Normandy Chair for Peace was the archetype of a chair for responsible innovation. So daring to step out of our comfort zone, moving towards the cross-discipline approach. Aloise mentioned it, the necessity of this cross-discipline, this transdisciplinary approach, the necessity to combine different aspects and sciences. We need to stop working in silos. Everything is interconnected. So what is the role of the researcher? Are we going to stay within our walls? Are we going to stay within us? No, today there is a translation, there is a simultaneous interpretation. The website is also translated. We would like to thank also Xavier for organizing the website. So this is the objective. It is to really disseminate the message of promoting peace with the earth.
Le travail de diplomatie scientifique, c'était l'ADN aussi de cette chaire à la demande du CNRS. Comme l'a dit Michel PRIEUR, c'est-à-dire créer des projets, des traités internationaux, les proposer, les envoyer aux personnes qui sont
we need to be
déléguées.
activists. We need
Aller
to go
militer, aller dans
within the
les enceintes des grandes
settings of the
organisations
main
internationales, ONU,
international
etc., pour aller voir
organizations.
les délégués,
We
leur,
need to
leur
work with
proposer des
ministers.
projets.
We need to work with
C'est
governments.
travailler avec des
So
ministres, avec
there's
des
a lot of
gouvernements. C'est ce qui a été fait.
different
Donc, il y a
work that
plusieurs
needs to be done
travaux,
in terms of
plusieurs
environmental
stratégies de
diplomacy.
diplomatie
And we will talk
environnementale. Et
about
ça, on va en
it
parler
tomorrow
matin, parce
morning,
que
because we
on
have
a
a
un ouvrage à
book
vous
that we want
présenter
to
sur la
present on
diplomatie
environmental
environnementale et plus
diplomacy.
précisément sur les coulisses
And
de la
the
diplomatie environnementale.
backdrops,
Demain également, nous aurons un
what
temps
is
fort
behind the
dédié à la ligne
notion
de recherche numéro 12 sur la
diplomatic,
boussole des possibles de
of
Mireille
scientific diplomacy. We have
Donc,
the
on a nos
mentors. We want
mentors comme
to talk
Aloïse,
about the
qui a été
compass
émue par le
of
départ de Monsieur
the
Costa. Eh bien, nous,
possibilities,
on a
and we
été
want to
émus
pay
par le départ de
tribute
Mireille Delmas-Marty et on lui a
to
rendu
Mireille
hommage. Et demain,
Delmas-Marty.
il y aura un beau
This was a strong
documentaire et je pense que
highlight
c'était
we
vraiment un moment
all
très fort que
lived
nous avons
and
vécu à Cerisy.
experienced in Cerisy. So we have
Donc,
a
on
time for
a ce
sharing
moment
this
de partage demain.
tomorrow. Tomorrow
Demain
afternoon, we will
après-midi, nous allons
focus
vraiment faire
on
le
the work
focus
of
sur le
Chair
travail du Chair
Emeritus,
c'est-à-dire
Professor Nicholas Robinson,
qui
and
là,
in
en termes de
terms of
diplomatie scientifique, est un
scientific
mentor,
diplomacy,
voilà,
is a
sœur de
real
Michel
mentor,
Prieur. Vous le
like
connaissez
Michel
d'ailleurs.
Prieur, and we will
Et
focus
demain,
on
je
the
vais faire vraiment
main
les
events
focus des grands
that
événements
he
qu'il a fait.
conducted. It is like
C'est
Michel,
également,
it's a
c'est
great
comme Michel,
level with
c'est d'un niveau
main
incroyable avec des
international
grandes organisations
organizations,
internationales,
major
des grands noms,
names.
des grands temps
And
forts.
all these
Et tous ces temps
highlights
forts ont
were
vraiment été le
possible
pouls
thanks to the
aussi
Normandy Chair for
de
Peace.
cette chaire
We'll
d'excellence
focus
Normandie
on
pour la
it
paix. On fera un focus demain après-midi.
tomorrow afternoon. So
Dimanche
Sunday
matin, c'est
morning, we will
relâche
take a
parce que Tony
break
Opposa
because Tony
n'est pas encore
Oposa
revenu
did
de
not,
différents voyages parce qu'il a été mis à l'honneur en
I mean,
Indonésie.
he
Et bien
needs
trop
to take a rest after
humble
his
pour se
traveling in
vanter d'avoir reçu un
Indonesia,
prix
and he needs
d'excellence
to
en
rest. We'll
Indonésie.
have some
Mais on
downtime on
aura un temps
Sunday
de relâche. Mais il
morning,
faut savoir que Tony
you
Opposa, même
know,
si
but
ça ne va pas être
you
rendu
need to
visible
know that Tony
ici, dans
Oposa
ce temps de clôture, a
filed some
fait beaucoup de
petitions for
choses. Des pétitions de
protecting
protection
marine
d'aires marines
areas.
protégées,
There are lots of
des
initiatives that are
initiatives aux
recognized in
Philippines
the
qui sont
Philippines,
reconnues
and a
et beaucoup de
lot
choses
of
qui, depuis,
initiatives, for
sont
example,
reprises
at
au
the
PRIEUR. Par
UNEP
exemple, la
that
question
are
des good stories.
recognized and
Si
taken
vous
up
allez sur le
by
site
the
internet du
UNEP.
Programme des Nations
For
Unies pour la
example, the
protection
Good
de l'environnement, il y
Stories
a des
movement,
éléments
and of
dessus.
course the
Et bien sûr, le
reports
fameux rapport
Making
Faire la paix
Peace
avec
with
la
Nature,
nature,
published
publié
by
par
the
le
UNEP,
Programme des
the
Nations
United
Unies
Nations
pour la
Environment
protection de
Program.
l'environnement.
And
Alors
Sunday
surtout dimanche
afternoon, do
après-midi,
not
ne
miss the
manquez pas
last
le dernier temps fort.
highlight.
On
We
va
will talk
parler de
about the
l'université
summer
d'éthique
school
qui s'est tenue
that
ici,
was
qui je
held
pense
here,
dans ma
which
carrière
in
en tout
my
cas
career
d'enseignante avec le
as a
tribunal
teacher, as a
international de Monsanto
professor,
fait
it
partie des
is
deux
one of
temps
the
forts
main highlights that I'm
pédagogiques pour le
very,
coup,
very proud
donc lequel je
of
suis
with the
immensément fière.
Monsanto
Et donc il y aura un
Tribunal.
documentaire,
So
Lolita Kouchen qui
we have
y a
some former
participé
students that
et
participated
certains
in
de
them
ces anciens élèves
in
sont
these highlights.
désormais
So we
experts
really
pour les
have
Nations Unies.
here
Donc on
an
a vraiment
incredible
planté ici avec une
experience. We
expérience
have planted
incroyable
some seeds
dans des
for the
jeunes esprits,
future in
des
young
graines d'avenir
minds,
pour cette chaire Normandie
and
pour
we
la
are
paix et
very
pour ce
proud
message de
of
paix
this.
avec la
And we
Terre.
will
Et nous en
finish
sommes infiniment fiers. Et
as
on
an echo
terminera en
with
écho avec la leçon inaugurale de Tony
the
Opposa,
lesson
qui s'est
from
tenue
Tony
ici.
Oposa,
On terminera
the
avec,
course,
lorsqu'il est venu ici, il a
initial
expliqué qu'il fallait
course.
saisir la Cour
He
internationale de
mentioned that
justice d'un
we
avis
needed
consultatif sur
to,
les obligations des États en
he
matière
nourished
climatique.
the
Il a
idea
lancé
that
l'idée,
we
il
needed
a nourri
to
l'idée, il a
go
inspiré
to the
lors de la frontière,
ICJ
il
to
a fait le
request
tour
an
des
advisory
grandes
opinion on
universités,
the
Harvard, Boston,
responsibility of
etc.
states
Et
in
aujourd'hui, la
relation
Cour
to
internationale de
climate
justice s'est bien
change.
saisie parce que d'autres collègues
Therefore,
aussi ont œuvré dans
we
ce
have
domaine-là.
supported
Pour notre
a
part,
youth
modestement,
movement.
nous
We
avons
have
soutenu un moment
organized
de
webinars.
jeunesse et nous
We
avons
have
organisé
helped
des
with a
webinaires. Nous
strategy.
avons aidé à la
And we
stratégie
have a
et nous
surprise
avons
that
une
will be
surprise qui sera
announced at
annoncée à
this
ce
time. So this
moment-là.
is for
Voilà
the
pour
first
cette première
day.
journée. Je
I would like
remercie
to thank
infiniment
all
tous
our
nos
leaders
leaders qui
that
se sont
took
déplacés en
part
présentiel aujourd'hui.
physically
Tout le
to
monde ne
our
pouvait pas se déplacer en
first day.
présentiel. À partir
Tomorrow,
de demain,
we
nous
will come
basculons
back to
à
the
l'amphithéâtre de la
amphitheater
Maison de la
at
Recherche
the
en sciences humaines
MRSH,
sur le campus 1.
the
Je remercie
MRSH
la région
premises
Normandie,
in
je
Caen.
remercie
I would
l'ensemble
like to
des
thank all of
partenaires,
our
la Société
partners,
française pour le droit
the
de l'environnement,
Society for the World
la
Commission
Commission
for Environmental
mondiale
Law of
pour le
the
droit de l'environnement de
IUCN,
l'UICN et bien
and
d'autres. Nous
all of our
préparons bien évidemment un
partners.
final de tous
There
nos
are
partenaires
many
qui
of
sont très
them.
nombreux.
I would like to
Si
thank
c'est
the
possible, je souhaiterais
interpreters
demander aux
that
interprètes
that are
qui nous suivent
following
depuis
up
4
for the
ans
past 4 years just
d'allumer
to
leur caméra
just
juste pour nous dire bonjour
switch
à
on the
l'écran,
camera
si
to say
c'est
hello.
possible en régie de nous montrer.
Alors ouais, je me suis permis de glisser dans cette...
Donc, nous avons
So we have Elise
Élise
De Battisti.
Baptisti.
Elise, do you want to
Excusez-moi.
take the floor?
Élise,
We have
si
Aude,
vous voulez
we have
prendre la
Sacha and
parole,
Abel,
Aude, et nous
who
avons
are
également
interpreters in
Sacha et Abel qui
Spanish.
sont les
So I
interprètes
would
en
like
espagnol.
to
Donc je vous laisse
switch
basculer
to
sur la
the
ligne
other
principale en binôme et que l'un puisse
lines
traduire
so
ce que
that
l'autre
I
dit.
would like to
Je vais d'abord
call on
appeler
every one of them
qui c'est
and
que je vais d'abord
Aude
appeler
can keep
Élise
translating. So if
et
you want
Aude
to
pourra
just
garder la
say
traduction.
2 words on your
Si vous voulez dire
experience.
2 mots sur votre expérience.
Vous m'entendez?
Can you hear me?
Bravo, merci d'être là. On vous voit.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Ah, we cannot hear.
Ah, on ne peut pas entendre. Si elle bascule en floor, il faut que tu enlèves... Oui, il faut que tu enlèves l'interprétation pour Élise le temps qu'elle parle et après tu la remets. Ça a l'air d'être compliqué au niveau technique. On tente quand même, Élise. On essaye à nouveau. C'est bon, Élise.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Ah, super. Donc, merci beaucoup, merci à vous. C'était une très belle expérience de participer à ces réunions, à ces conférences. Et j'ai appris énormément de choses. Donc, félicitations à vous tous parce que ce sont des thèmes à l'avant-garde et voilà, des termes aussi très courageux. Et voilà. Et puis je remercie aussi Aude qui m'a impliquée pour ces belles aventures. Donc ma collègue Aude qui est avec moi et voilà.
Merci beaucoup, Élise. Alors, on ne se connaissait pas, mais on s'est connus pour 80% des événements à distance. Aude Mousset.
Merci beaucoup. Je ne sais pas si vous m'entendez.
Oui.
Oui. Bah, merci, Émilie. Surtout, bravo. Bravo à toi pour tout ton travail durant ces 4 dernières années. C'est vrai que tu as été sur tous les fronts. Je ne sais pas ce que tu as oublié au niveau des thèmes. Tu les as tous couverts et bravo. Que ce soit Monsanto, c'est vrai qu'on s'est connus un peu grâce à ça, au Nantes Food Forum avec Juan Ignacio Pereira qui se bat pour obtenir justice pour les victimes de Monsanto et bravo pour tous les combats que tu as menés. Il y en a de nombreux et je pense que tu peux être fier de tout le travail que tu as accompli. Merci aussi de m'avoir impliquée dans tout cela. Et c'était une formidable expérience. J'espère que cette aventure continuera au-delà de la chair.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci,
en tout cas, merci à vous parce que je sais qu'on vous a beaucoup fait travailler. Et Élise, je sais aussi que l'un des temps forts qu'elle a aimé, c'est celui de New York, de Vanuatu. Et on en va en parler demain et après-demain, lors de ce fameux temps de clôture. Je pourrais donner la parole à nos interprètes espagnols. Je vais commencer par Saga, que je rencontre du coup pour la même occasion.
Oui, c'est vrai. C'est la première fois qu'on se voit.
Enchantée.
Merci. Ce n'est pas... on ne prend pas souvent la parole, les interprètes comme ça. Donc, c'est bien d'avoir l'opportunité de vous remercier, de vous féliciter pour tout ce travail que vous avez fait et de vous dire que pour moi, ça a été un grand honneur d'être interprète pour la chaire pendant, ça fait déjà 2 ans, un peu plus de 2 ans. Et si vous continuez de travailler dans ce type de sujet, je serai toujours ravie de travailler avec vous dans d'autres projets.
Muchas gracias. Sacha?
Saga.
C'est
ça.
Pardonne. Que je ne connais pas non plus, que je rencontre et que nous rencontrons tous. C'est Abel.
Et voilà.
Abel, on n'entend pas, il faut... Voilà.
Sí.
Hola.
Hola. Bueno,
Sí,
voy a hablar
bien.
en español primero. Para que se escuche. Ha sido para mí un auténtico placer trabajar para la cátedra. Quizás, si me permiten, pues dar un pequeño ejemplo.
Sí.
Nosotros, las personas que trabajamos como intérpretes, somos casi como mercenarias, ¿no? Tenemos que trabajar casi para cualquiera. Y hay veces que salimos de trabajar y nos sentimos de alguna manera con las manos sucias, sino con el resto del cuerpo, ¿no? Y trabajar para la cátedra desde el principio ha sido una limpieza de corazón. Así que me habría encantado estar ahí en Caen, hice todo lo posible para abrazar a todo el mundo, para conocer a todo el mundo en presencia y bueno, ojalá un día, si no, bueno, pues en esa conciencia de espíritus de la que hablan los pueblos indígenas estaremos. Muchas gracias por vuestro combate, es un combate por todo el mundo y ha sido como una ducha, como una limpieza el trabajar para la cátedra. Gracias.
Oh, okay. Alors, ce sont des compliments qui nous vont droit au cœur. Comment tu traduirais au mieux limpieza del corazón, ce qu'il vient de dire? Ou Michel? Ah, c'est émouvant, hein?
My heart was cleansed
Voilà,
while working for
c'était comme travail pour la chair, c'était comme nettoyer le cœur parce que ça a beaucoup de sens en fait. Merci infiniment pour purifier le cœur. Voilà, merci infiniment.